think the concept of a pocket computer is here to stay. Like the phone is not going away in the sense. We're always going to have some computer close to you. I think the real question becomes, what does that look like? I think the future is twofold. One is like the hardware will shrink. The hardware will shrink. The hardware will become smaller. The hardware will essentially do more stuff. Is it VR? Is it a lot of crazy ideas out there? But we are in that progress. I think that's very important to keep in mind. And the second is AI. I don't think AI will take over all of our jobs immediately. That's not feasible the way artificial intelligence works. Like you need a lot of computers. I think a lot of people think about it like the movies, and it's like, we're not there yet. Google and these companies have like tons and tons and tons of servers to just run a basic question. And so we're not there yet.
Welcome to Latinx in Power, a podcast hosted by Thaisa Fernandes.
Welcome to Latinx in Power. Today we are talking with Melisa Márquez Rodriguez. Melisa is a highly accomplished software engineer manager with a passion for mobile app development and community engagement. With years of experience in the tech industry, Melisa has established herself as a leading expert in her field. She works as a Bachelor of Science in computer engineering and works as a senior software engineer at Cash App. Melisa's hard work and dedication have not gone unnoticed. In fact, she has recently featured on the prestigious BBC list of 100 Inspirational Innovative Women, a testament to her outstanding contributions to the tech industry and beyond. Whoa, I'm so excited with this conversation. Thank you so much, Melisa.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
In this episode, Melisa will provide valuable insights into the world of mobile app development and showcase the importance of community involvement and work-life balance. So a question that I usually like to start is, what does it mean to be a Latina for you?
I guess for me, I was born and raised in Puerto Rico. So for me, being Latina is that there's this underlying set of cultural experiences that unites a lot of Latin America, our shared heritage, our common struggles, our similar language. For me, it's always mind-blowing when I meet someone from any of the 30 countries plus from Latin America. And it's like, we are able to quickly find common ground. I think another thing for me that is very Latina for me is music. I come from Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico is known for a lot of important artists that have pushed Spanish music, especially across the globe. And for me, that there's our history from back in the 500 years ago when people meet on the fires to dance and meet and plan their new things, to getting us through the current hurricanes and earthquakes that happen in Mexico and Puerto Rico. I think that magic that we are able to be together under one shared heritage, even if we are all from different countries, is very, very powerful for me.
Amazing. I love that. And I love that you mentioned music. I think music is definitely part of our lives. And I feel especially now because, oh my God, we have so many artists up there and we listen to them on the radio. I always get so excited when I listen to the radio or even a music festival or any celebration with artists from Latin America. Oh my God, that's so incredible. And I love to see them speaking in Spanish and Spanglish. That's amazing.
For me, it's I've been to multiple parts of the world and every so often there's one song, but at least one song comes out and it's I know these people, which is very exciting.
I feel you. That's incredible. And can you tell us about your background and how you became a software engineer manager specialized in mobile apps?
Yes, I guess there's two parts to this. There's the how do I become an engineer and how do I become a manager? Because these are two parts of my personality, myself, and I've managed to combine them into being an engineering manager. But how I got into technology, it's not a super happy story. When I was 12, I got hit by a hotel bus and I was out for a year and I couldn't go to school for 6 or 7 months. And this was the early 2000s. This was before iPhones, before social media, before now we're glued to these technologies. But back then, a computer was this fancy thing. And for me, I always had this aching question of how does this magical device come from electricity. And that was like my big goal. And so during high school, I studied on Saturdays. I took a lot of extra classes to kind of try to get myself to the School of Engineering in the University of Puerto Rico. And I eventually got there and I studied computer engineering. The manager part, leadership, the school was very far away from me. And so when I moved to University of Puerto Rico, I didn't know how to make friends. I didn't know anyone. Everyone was very far away. So the way I solved that problem was I started volunteering. And I volunteered in a lot of student organizations, EEE. I was part of the student government. I was all over the place. And that kind of connects back to how I got into mobile and how I currently live in the Bay Area. Back in 2010, I was the president for the EEE Computer Society, the student chapter back in Puerto Rico. And we wanted to show students new technologies. That was our big, audacious goal for the year. It was like, what can we show people that the professors cannot? And so we contacted Google. We said, hey, Google, can you help us with this project? And we created we call it the Android Development Challenge. There's this very similar one that existed at that time. And we kind of organized throughout the entire university, and we had a bunch of people building their first Android apps, and this was like before the major apps, people were building things like a coin flipper and things like that. And that's how I personally got into mobile. As the organizer, I'm always a believer of like, I need to know something about that specific item. And so I learned Android that way. And so throughout, I kept working on Android until I graduated in 2014. And at some point, my friend was, hey, you're very good at this Android thing. You should apply to Silicon Valley. And I applied to a bunch of different companies. And I got very lucky with this company called Weebly. They flew me over and offered me to join. And I became their kind of like lead Android developer for a while. And so I was in charge of their app, and I grew with that app, eventually taking all that leadership experience I had from college, plus my skill set, and kind of became the organic leader of the team.
That's incredible. Oh my God, your journey is so interesting. And it's a lonely process sometimes, right? When we get into college, we move to a different place, and volunteering, it's a great way to make connections and learn and feel part of the community. We just interviewed someone, Maria Gianotte, that talked about that, how one of her best friends came from like her volunteering experience, and you take it a step further because you learn a lot of different skills that you can use as a manager too. So I think this is something that sometimes people, maybe they don't think that much, or maybe they don't know about it because you're like volunteering, you're helping a good cause, but in the end, you're also making connections and learning new skills. So I think this is another sign for like all of us, keep in mind volunteering work as well. That's incredible.
Yeah, helping community has always been important to me, and I'm part of multiple communities, and I try to serve them as much as I can, and that's how we met also.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, that's incredible. And another topic that we are trying to bring to this podcast is work-life balance. So how do you balance your professional career with your community work and personal life?
I'm not the greatest at this. I admit it. Some people say that I am working even when I'm not working. Some of the volunteer sometimes feels like a job. With COVID-19, I made it a priority. I was forced to sit down and be in my house, and we were in lockdown for a bit. And so I learned how to have better boundaries, better balances around that things. I think for me, the biggest help I always do is I create a system for most things. I am a believer of consistent repetition allows you to get stuff easier, like just learning a skill, or even in your own house. It's like, if you wash the dishes every day, you don't have to worry about it at the end of the week. So basic things, there are things in this life that you need to do. You need to sleep, you need to cook, you need to shower, you need to do these things. And so as much as I can make them easy, and like reliable. That's usually kind of my best work. And yeah, just setting some boundaries around saying no. I have a big problem with saying yes all the time. And I've just learned over the years as I've grown older to just say no or ask myself, where does my time or like, what is my priority? Is it my current personal projects? Is it friends and family? Is it work? And kind of like be very conscious of how I divide my time around these things.
Yeah, that's a really good advice. Be conscious about your priorities. And based on that, I think it's much easier to say yes or no. And even when we say no, feeling okay about the no, because you know your priorities, right? So yes, that's a really good advice. I like that, like knowing your priorities.
Yeah.
I don't know if you like to put things on paper too. I'm like a paper person. I love like
nice.
Technology, but I like paper.
That's totally nice. Definitely. And you do feel guilty. I'm not going to pretend that you don't feel guilty. Even as you get older and get better, sometimes I do feel it. It's like, it's the guilt. And I have to remind myself, this is okay. Or just talk to someone. I feel like sometimes when I get into my own brain, it's just, you feel super guilty. And sometimes I have friends and family that's like, can you set me straight? Can you tell me that I did this correctly? And so they help me out in that way.
Mm-hmm. That's good. I feel especially with volunteer work, it's hard to say no because you're helping a good cause. And that's a good point too. Like talk with your family too. And one thing that, I don't know, my therapist many, many years ago said to me that sometimes when you are saying yes, you're like saying no to yourself. That means even your rest, that sometimes I don't know how I feel about that. I underestimate how tired or overwhelmed I am. So I'm just like, oh, this is just another thing. It's easy, quick, right? But the rest, it's another thing that's very important too.
Yes, rest is definitely important. I worked with a sleep coach once and she was like, you should sleep, you should relax, you should do these kind of things. Also, like at some point you burned out if you take too much. And, I'm not perfect. I've burned out many times in my lifetime. And, with experience, I've learned that I need a rest. I can't do everything. There's such a thing as volunteer burnout. There's such a thing as like wanting to do too much of a good thing. It's important to take breaks because, the type of community work that I do are things that like, they're not going to change overnight, and 1 hour that you're resting versus 1 hour of working is not going to make a big impact in the long term. And the same applies to work. Like sometimes productive focused work is better than pushing yourself the same work across like 10 hours.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a very important thing to keep in mind. How do you see the future of mobile app development and how do you see it evolving in the coming years?
I think the concept of a pocket computer is here to stay. Like the phone is not going away in the sense. We're always going to have some computer close to you. I think the real question becomes, what does that look like? I think the future is twofold. One is like the hardware will shrink. The hardware will shrink. The hardware will become smaller. The hardware will essentially do more stuff. Is it VR? Is it a lot of crazy ideas out there? But we are in that progress. I think that's very important to keep in mind. And the second is AI. I don't think AI will take over all of our jobs immediately. That's not feasible the way artificial intelligence works. Like you need a lot of computers. I think a lot of people think about it like the movies and it's like, we're not there yet. Google and these companies have like tons and tons and tons of servers to just run a basic like question. And so we're not there yet, but I think these two things are just going to change how we perceive mobile development in the future. And I think the biggest thing you can do as a developer, as an engineer, is just to stay nimble and accept that like you're going to grow and things are going to change. Like I always love talking to people they've been here for 30 plus years. They develop like apps for CDs. What they tell me is like, hey, I started developing CDs. Now I'm doing mobile apps. I think as long as you have a strong fundamentals and you're willing to evolve what you're working on, you can still keep yourself relevant in the industry.
Mm-hmm. That's a really good point. And I like what you said about sometimes our references are the movies. And oh my God, it's so so different, right? And this reminds me of like sometimes seeing some sci-fi movies that the phones are transparent and very small. And I'm always thinking about it. It looks beautiful in the movies, but imagine me as a user using a transparent phone. And it's like, I can see it. I can read it. That sounds terrible. And I imagine like with people with disabilities, like, no, that's a no-go. And you brought a really good point of like, trying to learn those technologies and understanding that it's going to take time too. It's not like the movies, but I think especially now it's something that we are talking a lot. And our references, sometimes they might not be so great.
Yeah, it's good that people keep up, but also remember that, media and YouTube and social media amplifies everything. And it's important to remember that, like, is this true? Also, how much do you really need to know about this topic? Like, are you going to be an AI specialist or do you just need to work with AI? Those are two very different things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I think the focus now is also, I don't know, maybe because of the media, the focus, I feel that is not in the right direction. For me, for example, something that I have been thinking about is misinformation, how we are going to handle that, how the future is going to look like. Because now, especially like for me, being Brazilian, being Latina, sometimes I just freak out because my parents, for example, they use WhatsApp a lot. And sometimes they share with me a lot of fake news. And I ask them some questions. It's very, very basic, but for them, they don't understand. Sometimes my father, for example, he receives a lot of fake news. And I checked the website and I was like, this is not legit. It's clearly not legit. And sometimes it's like a video of someone saying that they are a specialist and my father believes they are, but I was like, it doesn't sound legit. They are just like spreading fake news. So I quite often think about that because if my parents, a lot of my family, or even myself sometimes when we check something very fast, we don't think too much. And when something is clearly like fake and is spreading misinformation, so it's something that, I don't know, it sounds very scary.
I agree. I think checking your sources, being critical about the information you receive. Like, we also get information so fast that we don't sit down at a time to process this. And I think that's something we kind of missing. I mean, I'm not that old, but like in the 90s when we were young, this wasn't a thing. Like, the news would come in a paper, you would have to check sources, you would hear around people. And like, I feel people don't do that anymore. They just quickly assume everything. And I read once that it's because it's easier to publish now than before. Like, before, getting a book, getting into a newspaper was a much harder endeavor. Then nowadays, anyone can do it. And so the onus is on us to figure out what is it and what is it not. And I think that also comes from, how do we improve our education, a society? How do we teach the next generation how to be critical about these things and not take it at face value?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And who has been the biggest influence on your life and career?
I always say it's very cliche, but it's my parents. My parents and I were from Fajardo, Puerto Rico. This is even within the context of Puerto Rico, we are a very tiny town that we're on the coast and not a lot happens there. And, they both inspired me in very different ways, and it kind of shows up. My father, he's a teacher. He's a physical education teacher and he's a sports coach. And I'll be very frank, I don't love to follow sports, but he taught me a lot of lessons using sports as a medium. And, a few lessons are, I always remember him complaining to his high school basketball students. They were pretending to be the NBA, but they couldn't shoot a basic ball. He was very angry at them because it's like, you don't even know how to shoot the ball and you're pretending to be, Kobe Bryant. That's a lesson I've taken forever. It's like, learn the fundamentals of whatever you need to know. You don't need to be an expert in everything. You just need to know enough that you know the basics and you can have a conversation with people around it, but you don't need to be like a super in-depth personality. And so whenever I am doing something new, I apply that. It's like, what is the very basic things I need to know so I can be effective at this? I think the other part from sports that I've kind of learned is community and helping other people out. I saw how my dad he was a community leader. He helped other folks. He helped students get out of trouble by just being them and providing them a ball to shoot. And so that's like one aspect from my dad. And then from my mom is a very smart, aspirational woman that she had me when she was 19. And I saw her grow. I grew and saw her how she would like get her master's degree, how she worked tirelessly to fight gender stereotypes, how to, be more professional. And I saw how she climbed the ladder within Puerto Rico as a whole. And she taught me a lot of things. How should I behave? Who are the right people to talk to? Where should I focus? And she's been, even to this day, a great mentor that, I call up to her and be like, hey, what do you think about this situation? Can you help me? And so I say I'm a mix of both. I'm like pragmatic and local and volunteer for my dad, and then very ambitious and want to keep climbing for my mom. And sometimes they're in conflict, but sometimes I make it work for both sides.
Incredible. I love your parents already. That's incredible. And which advice would you give to someone interested in pursuing a career in mobile app development?
It goes back to that fundamental idea. I would say pick one, and Android, iOS, and try to learn from it and try to learn the basics of computing through it. That will give you a better understanding of things on the long term. And what I mean by that, it's like at some point, I hate the notion when people say, oh, multiple programming language. That means you know a lot. It's like, yes, but at the same time, after many years, patterns start to repeat. And what I think it's more important for people to know is like the patterns and the way these things manifest, rather than like, I need to know everything under the sun. The other advice I give to people is choose the right tool for what you want to do. If you want to be a game developer, maybe not learning Android or iOS is the right tool. If you want to be an Apple developer, then learning iOS and Swift is like the right call. Honestly, engineering is just taking all these tools and fixing a problem for someone, more than the pure programming aspects. And I think especially nowadays, we kind of glamorize just programming. And it's like, programming is cool, but I fixed this problem. I helped provide tax services for free in Cash App. And that's something I'm very proud. So that's, always be curious, start to see the patterns, always ask why this works. There's always people who are willing to explain. And at some point with growth, you'll start to see that like it repeats, the cycle repeats after a few years.
Yeah, absolutely. I really like this notion of focusing on the problem. And I think especially you need to be passionate about your users. You want to help your users, right? Making their life better or providing a benefit, or like focusing on the problem and how you can help your users. I think it makes everything more interesting, to be honest, I feel.
Agree. And, I come from a old school engineering in Puerto Rico. Like computer science is not as evolved, but there's a lot of civil, there's a lot of mechanical engineers. And like, I always take the example of a bridge. It's like when you're building a bridge, the bridge can't fall. And I try to apply similar principles when I'm developing software. It's like, what's the goal? What do they want? And how can I make this as easy, as simple for them to use without them feeling they need to like understand like a manual to get this working on?
Mm-hmm. Incredible. And in this episode, we are all about sharing stories, sharing resources. So I'd like to hear from you. Which resource helped you in your journey?
I love learning from people. And before the internet, it was you go volunteer, talk to people. Nowadays, you have a bunch of content creators from all over the place. And I'm not saying you should follow everyone under the sun, but it's an easy way for you to access experts or people who are very into a specific topic and get it at like blazing fast speed. And, it also helps you keep in touch. I always get asked a lot, like, how do you keep in touch with all the news? And it's like, I just follow a bunch of creators and they post a bunch of stuff and I watch a few videos and that's it. I don't need to be an expert. I don't need to read the paper, but that's an easy way for me to like keep up with the world. The second one, and this has always been, it's more around language, especially if you move to the US and English is your second language. I had a boss once from India and he had been in the States for 20 years. And he's like, you need to get better at writing is not my biggest skill. Unfortunately, fortunately or unfortunately, for people who English is a second language, the pandemic pushed everyone to writing because we're now remote and everything needs to be written. And so my biggest tip is invest, either taking classes, or for me, what I did, I invest in this program called Grammarly, which is an AI to help you like track all these errors. I use that all the time with my friends at work, in anything I do, try to like check it, double check and make sure that like I have a helping hand and like things are more clear. And so I've gotten overall much better at my English writing just because of that. I read books, but it's not my like major thing. I always recommend 2 soft skills. One is Switch, How to Change Things When Change is Hard, from Chip Heath and Dan Heath. And the other one is Crucial Conversations, Tools for Talking When Stakes Are High by Carrie Patterson. Developing your soft skills is important in any field you are. So I definitely recommend those 2.
Incredible soft skills. And it's interesting what you said about the writing skills, especially for folks who English is their second language. I think it's something that I started to think more, and also like paying attention to especially maybe big tech or like tech in general. They rely so much in written communication, especially because we have teams all over the place. So we spend a lot of time writing documentation or reading documentation. So it takes a lot of mental space as well. I remember like scheduling some time just to read documentation. It's hard. And sometimes it's like 10 pages that you need to read because you need to know what is happening and make comments, read comments, answer comments. So it's something that definitely, especially for Latinx folks, is something that we need to prioritize for sure.
Yeah, I agree, 100%. As the world becomes more globalized and more async, this is a crucial skill that you need to know. This is a funny story, but I always remember one of the weird quirks about Puerto Rico is, since we're part of the US, we get like everything very early on. And I was the first kind of generation of people that like had to learn English, because at some point we weren't getting anything in Spanish, or it was like 4 or 5 times more expensive. And I always remember my parents being like, it was a video game. I think it was The Legend of Zelda. And I was like, I don't understand the book either. They bought me the guidebook. I was like, can you help? And they didn't know how to help. And that's like, for me, that was a big aha moment. It's like, I need to invest all my life in this. Otherwise, I can't get forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. That's so interesting, because now like I love to read. I read a lot, and I read a lot in English. And now I'm trying to force myself to read in Portuguese too, because sometimes I don't want to read the translation of the book in Portuguese. So every time I go to Brazil, I usually buy some books from Brazilian authors because I want to read it in Portuguese. So that's so funny.
I have a couple Spanish books too that I read just exactly for that same reason.
Oh my God. Yeah, that's incredible. Melisa, thank you so much for your time. I learned a lot. You're very inspiring to me. It's been many, many years since we met, I feel. So I'm going to leave the last minutes for you to share anything you want to share, and also where people can find you.
Yeah, keep growing, keep learning, people. We live in a world where your brain is your biggest asset. And people can find me at Twitter at melimarpr. It's very Spanish. I also have a website, melisamarquez.com. All of the links to LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, GitHub are all there. So if you want to get in contact with me, find your favorite social and just shoot me a text.
Amazing. Thank you so much.